Good afternoon, everyone. Adrian, we're so happy to hear the good news about your son. And we want to see you sponsor a lot more of these luncheons, but all for simchas, chasanas, brisim, anniversaries, only simchas. So last week, we asked a question. When you know something is wrong, before anyone tells you, before any law compels you, where does that knowing come from? We told a story about this amazing rescue operation that took place in Denmark in 1943, where just average, everyday citizenry, Christian Lutheran citizenry in Denmark, quietly, stealthily evacuated 8,000 Jews and smuggled them into Sweden. And when years later they were asked, why did you do it? They just shrugged their shoulders and said it was the right thing to do. But where did that come from? Where did that nonchalant response come from? It was the right thing to do. The culture that seems to be emerging, especially from the youth today, seems to be one of moral relativism, where morality comes from consensus. And whatever the group thinks is moral, whatever it thinks is immoral. So morality, in large part, in many places in the world, has become untethered from an absolute anchor. Last week, we also looked at the trials of Nuremberg that took place in 1946, 1947, where the defense of the former Nazi officers was that we were just following the law of the land. We did what the government told us to do. We're not guilty of anything. And that put the judges in a big quandary. How do we deal with this? Where they finally had to admit that there is a law above the law of man, beyond the law of governments, that governs all things. And that's what allowed them to define what it means to have a crime against humanity. Ironically, the only time you hear crimes against humanity today are focused against the Jewish people. But that's another class. From there, we talked about the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden. And we came across a word for knowledge in Hebrew. And that word is part of the name of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that word in Hebrew is da'at. Now, there are different words for knowledge in Hebrew. There's wisdom, there's intellectual understanding, and then there's a subjective internalization called da'at. So in context, da'at, in relation to the Garden of Eden, is not information about good and evil. Rather, it's the lived, embodied awareness of the difference between good and evil. We messed up big time in the Garden of Eden. There's no question about that. There's no way around that. But there was also a gift that came along with the sin that was committed. And that gift was da'at. Something was planted in us. A knowledge of something real, something objective, something permanent. And that's that voice inside of us. Unfortunately, it gets clouded because it is subjective. Finally, last week, we ended up with God's famous question to Adam when he said, Ayeka, where are you? That's not a question about geography, it's a question about morality. We ended talking about how da'at can become clouded and what we're supposed to do with it. Let's go back to the garden for a moment. The Torah says that the serpent, the nachash, was more cunning than any creature in the field. It goes to the woman not with a command, not with a temptation, but with a little question. The question begins, Afki. Afki. Did God really say, you shall not eat from the tree of the garden? The serpent doesn't say, go ahead, eat the fruit. It's all going to be good. It's delicious. It says, did God really say that? Just put a question in the human's mind. Hasidus makes a big deal about this and goes on forever. About how one introduces a sliver of doubt and how it alters behavior completely. Are you sure? Did he really mean that? Is it really as clear as you thought it was? And this leads to a discussion in Hasidus about the nature of the soul. Anthropomorphically in Hasidus, we talk about two inclinations that we all have, a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, a good inclination or a godly inclination, and an not so godly inclination, aka an evil inclination. It's that inner pull towards what we know is wrong. But nonetheless, we are pulled in that direction. When we get pulled, there's not a voice in our head that says, go do something obviously wrong. We would push back against that. It's a different voice. It's a subtle voice. It's a voice, you can do that. It's not exactly wrong. It doesn't exactly say this. It really means that. You don't think God has bigger things to occupy himself with? I know you just had a ribeye steak, but a Toblerone chocolate bar, it says OUD on it, looks really, really good for dessert. I can eat that and all will be good with me. For those of you who have not connected the dots, we're not talking about just a Toblerone. The question becomes, how can something so bad taste so good? How can we be drawn to this? The bottom line is that the conversation about Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, about good and evil in our inclinations, is a subtle conversation taking place in all of us. Eve, Hava, sees that the tree is beautiful, that the fruit is really desirable, and that it would make her wise. None of these things were untrue. Each one of those statements was true. The tree was beautiful. The fruit was desirable, and the tree would make her wise. Nothing was untrue about that statement. The serpent didn't lie. The serpent got a bad rap for the last 5,786 years. The serpent didn't lie. It simply reframed. And that's why moral clarity for us today requires more than just good intentions. It requires a certain hikern. It requires a certain trained awareness, an ability to recognize the serpent's question before it's already done its work. If we turn to the Tanya was the magnum opus written by the founder of Chabad Hasidut, the Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, the master of the Tanya. To paraphrase, he says that the evil inclination, which we all have, does not come to a person and say, sin. It comes first and says, it's permitted. And it may be permitted. I'm not going to ask if anyone has ever experienced this strategy in use against oneself, but perhaps you have a friend who's had this experience, because of course nobody in this room has ever had that experience. But can we all identify with what that's like, what that temptation is like? Nope. Okay, I guess I'm in the wrong room. Chocolate, okay. Alavai, it's only a chocolate bar after a steak, but yes. Questions, comments before we go on? Sorry? Well, certainly God knows everything before it happens. Devar Tova is making a point that clearly God knew what was going to happen before it happened. So he must have wanted it to happen. But he gave us free choice, but nonetheless, with that free choice, he also knew what we were going to do before we did it. We had agency. We had agency to make a decision. But God also knew what that decision was going to be. Why? How? How does that work? Hard to imagine if you're not God, if you're not beyond the finite reality. If you were beyond the finite reality, you would be beyond time and you would be beyond space, meaning that you could see things playing out in real time. What's happening in the present is actually part of your past. That's very hard to get your head around. So for purpose of this conversation, God did give free choice to man. If he had not given free choice to man and woman, then we could not have violated his command to eat from the tree. Further, for there to be a choice, there also has to be a paradigm for good and for evil. They both have to exist. Otherwise, where's the choice? Otherwise, you're only choosing good all the time. So evil must exist. The difference that the sin brought upon us is that prior to the sin, the evil was something external. It was not subjective. It was not internalized. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. It was something out there. So it was very easy to say, pass the Brussels sprouts instead of pass the Three Musketeers bar. Like it wasn't even a challenge. Brussels sprouts were where it was at in the garden. Broccoli, I don't know, whatever. But again, as soon as we ate from the fruit, evil becomes internalized. It comes into our kishkas and it stays there. Hence, as I said earlier, if this is bad, why does it taste so good? And that's what we've been dealing with ever since. Larry, did you want to say something?
So you said evil, once we ate the fruit, evil became internalized. So before we ate the fruit, there was no choice of good and evil?
There was choice, but it was a fair fight. Before the sin, evil was acting as a paid employee of God. He was punching a clock. He had his employee manual that said, create temptation, create a little doubt, do your job. And that's what the job that evil did. It reluctantly did its job because he was getting paid for it. God said, do this, punch a clock, and you get paid for it. So that's what it did. After the sin, evil got supercharged. It got into its job a little more than it was supposed to because it was living in our kishkas. That's the difference. That gave us a more difficult choice. We had free choice to begin with. It upped the stakes a lot. It made us, instead of goody-goodies, it made us true partners in creation. So when God banishes us, all of a sudden, we have to get our hands dirty. We have to go figure it out ourselves. Much more difficult. Gail.
Think about very much. They ask us, a Christian person would say to you, do you have sin or sin? And I'm wondering, because you work in the Christian communities up in the North Georgia, and you hear the word original sin. And I'm wondering how you put those two thought processes of a Christian understanding of original sin versus the sin that you're referring to from the Garden of Eden that became internalized.
The, yeah, for sure. Original sin, doctrinally, for the Christian, is one of their basic inyanim, one of their basic foundations of their religion. That we are born guilty, that a brand new baby born is already guilty because of that original sin. And therefore, pardon me? Breaking God's first commandment to all of humanity. There were no Jewish people, there were no Christian people, there were no Buddhists. Before the first story, before anything comes, a command to all of humanity. Don't do this. And we did it. And that's the original sin for the Christian. And the only remedy for the Christian is to embrace their deity, whom they call the Son of God. And that's the only thing that can rectify the sin from the Christian perspective. First of all, let's look at the word sin. The word sin, chet, means what in English? Missed the mark. That's sin. That's sin from a Jewish perspective. From a Christian perspective, if a tzaddik, if a saintly man who did nothing but beautiful deeds his entire life was in Auschwitz, and he practiced nothing but compassion and beauty in Auschwitz, and a Nazi officer took out a revolver and shot him in the head and killed him. Years later, after the Holocaust, the Nazi guard realizes he probably went a little overboard, and he turns to the Christian God for salvation, and it's granted in his mind. From a Christian perspective, the Jew goes to hell, the Nazi guard goes to heaven. That's theology. That's just theology. We don't have theology like that. One of the big points of departure between Christianity and Judaism is that theological point right there, original sin. The other is the nature of good and evil. The way I described evil as being a hired hand working for God, punching the clock. For the Christian, evil is an absolute oppositional force working against God. That there's a battle between God and Satan. Larry. Is the absence of good automatically evil? in, from our construct, you have what is good, you have what is evil, and then there's a big space in between that we can call permitted. The language in Hasidut is we have Kedusha, that which is holy, Klippa, that which is unholy, and the Klippa comes in two forms. You have three absolutely unhealthy schmutzidik. Everybody knows what schmutzidik is? Dirty, thank you. Three dirty inclinations, klipot, if you will, that no matter what you do, if you mess around with them, even if you're trying to do something good and lift them up, you're just going to get dirty. So our job is to stay away from those three evil things. But there's another form. Yes. The three evil things are anger, illicit sexual desire, and boastfulness. Boastfulness. The rest of Klippa, the rest of this area is something neutral in the Jewish understanding. In other words, anything else we come in contact with that is permitted comes from the world of Klippa. It's up to the Jew to either take that permitted object and turn it into Kedusha, to turn it into something holy, or to use it in a degraded fashion so that it goes into the world of the schmutz. That's in our hands. So to answer Larry's question, if something is evil, is something good or evil and nothing in between? No, there's an in between. For the rest of the world, there's an in between. It's called what's permitted. For the Jew, we are supposed to take the permitted and turn it into what's holy. So the word literally klippa in Hebrew means shell. If you're eating a nut, if you're eating a sunflower seed, when you crack it open, the outside is called a shell. Why is it called a shell? Because the shell obscures what's inside of it. The klippa obscures whatever holiness is inside of it, whatever godly spark is inside of it. Remember, nothing in existence, even glatt treif, even glatt evil, has an element of a godly spark in it. But what makes it evil is that there's a shell over it, so the godliness cannot come out. Okay? Anyone else? All right, let's move on. Imagine a group of travelers crossing a very vast and difficult landscape. They're carrying with them an ancient map. This map has guided generations and generations before them. It shows where the rivers are. It shows where the cliffs are. It shows where the ground becomes unstable. It indicates the safest paths to travel through very dangerous terrain. Picture that? For many years, the travelers are following the map very carefully. They respect it, they consult it, they study it, and over time, something subtle begins to happen. New travelers inherit the map. But all of a sudden, they're not studying it so closely. They remember a few landmarks. They repeat a few cute cliche phrases about the terrain. But fewer people actually unfold the map and examine it carefully. And then something really curious happens. Travelers begin wandering into places the map once warned about. They fall into ravines, clearly marked on the map. They argue about which direction is safest because they don't consult the map. All the while, the map is in the back pocket. You with me? Jewish tradition suggests that something very similar can happen with moral knowledge. We live in a world that speaks constantly about morality. Justice, rights, dignity, equality, diversity, equity, inclusion. These words are everywhere. And where do you hear them? You don't hear them spoken so much from the pulpit. You hear it from the pulpits. You hear it from the media. People not qualified to discuss morality. Fewer and fewer people ask where those words come from or what originally gave those words meaning. So we inherit the fruit of the moral tree, but we forget completely about the tree that produced it. And that's the state that we find ourselves in today. The Garden of Eden is that tree. The da'at, the knowledge that was planted in us there, the knowledge of good and evil as something that's real, something objective, something that existed before any human being decided it did. That's the source. That's the source of every moral instinct that the Danish rescuers felt, that the Nuremberg judges reached for. It's what we feel when we know something is wrong before anyone has to tell us. Questions? Comments? It was planted in us as a result of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, no question it was a sin, but it was also a gift. And that's the gift. The gift is that we have that discernment within us. But because we, royal we, collective we, not us we, misplaced the map, or it wouldn't even occur to people to look at the map, as a result, the words become detached from their meaning. They don't mean anything anymore. And that's why you see slogans all over on any issue, on any moral issue. Not getting political here, but take a subject like abortion. You have these slogans. You have pro-choice, pro-life. It's nonsense. The slogans mean absolutely nothing. They don't come close to describing what's really going on, what the ethical considerations are on that subject or any particular subject. And people who get spoon-fed from the right, from the left, from cable, from network, from podcast, and if they're eating it like this, I'm sorry, not a good thing. Sorry? Seichel? Seichel? Is it seichel? Is it brains? Is it brains? I don't know. I don't know. If we're speaking about this subject from our perspective, from a Jewish perspective, then we are all capable of doing evil things, but there's always a way back. It's never too late. There's always a way to come back to your equilibrium. That's tshuva, exactly. That's returning to God. Dr. Rosengarten.
What if they had not eaten from that fruit in the garden?
We,
What if they didn't acquire that knowledge?
so,
Or even though they had free choice, was that going to happen one way or the other?
so the question is like this. The question is, as a parent, most people are parents. You see a child, you see your child, a teenager, 16, 17 years old, who's already making his own decisions about things. You want to guide him to what's going to be ultimately a good life for him, an easy life for him, a rewarding life for him. But he wants to experiment somewhere else. He wants to go try things that you know from your own experience are not good for him. But you can't force him. So either way, you got to love your kid. That's the answer to the question.
No, it's not. The question is, would we be living a different life today?
For sure we would. It's,
Or did Hashem already know that they were going to eat from that apple? It was in the plan. It was in design.
so the answer is, what would happen if we hadn't eaten? The answer to that question is, yeah, it would all be kumbaya for our entire lives. We would live forever. There would be no death. There would be no illness. Doctors, you guys would have to be plumbers because there would be no need for you.
There'd be no stuffed toilets.
But the second question is, was this a setup? That's your question. Did God set this whole thing up? There's a lot of opinions on this. My personal opinion, Yonatanism, is yes. Anyone else? Still being challenged what? It wasn't such a difficult challenge because we really weren't interested in doing the wrong thing. Okay. After Adam and Eve are bounced from the garden, God places at the entrance of the Garden of Eden what? A flaming, turning sword. The words from Genesis are, and he placed the cherubim, the cherubim, and the flame of an ever-turning sword to guard the path of the tree of life. So we could never have access to it. The Hasidic masters ask, why does the Torah tell us which direction the sword was turning? What does it matter? Huh? Yeah, exactly. Okay. Here's their answer. The sword turns in every direction because the path back to moral clarity is not a fixed road. You can't approach it from just one direction and demand that the door open. You have to find it from wherever you are. Every person, wherever we stand, has a path. The da'at, the knowledge given to us in the garden, is still here. The awareness of good and evil, the knowledge of something real, is still alive in each and every one of us. Sometimes it's buried pretty deeply. Sometimes it's confusing. Sometimes we're busy listening to the serpent. But that place of moral clarity is never destroyed. The path back is always open. It's never too late from wherever we are. Okay, before we wrap up, Eric.
Everything that stayed good is really that awful. Everything's great. There's more than 6 billion of us, but because everybody's living for that. But I mean, how bad is it when everything?
How bad would that be? I don't know. Look, we would all be literally sitting under palm trees drinking pina coladas 24/7. If that sounds good to you, go for it. Okay, I had a few thoughts. I had a few thoughts on this week's Parsha that I'd like to offer you. There's a detail that I think most people miss because it cuts against the picture that we usually carry of the Israelites in the desert. This Torah portion this week is called Bamidbar, which simply means in the wilderness, in the desert. And it opens up the fourth book of the Bible. We just finished Vayikra, the book of Leviticus. We turn the page, we start a new book, which is where we're at, the book of Numbers. The verse I want to focus on is in the second chapter, the second verse. It says, each man shall camp by his division with a flag of his father's house. Think about it, a flag in the wilderness, 3,000 years ago. We think about like this dusty, deserty kind of place, this vast, anonymous mass wandering around the desert, displaced people, blurred with sand and sun. But the Torah's first move is that the moment that the people are organized as a people, God gives every tribe a flag, a specific color, a specific symbol, a specific place to stand and to camp. Jewish tradition has always read this as something more than just logistics. Each tribe carried a different strength. Some were leaders, some were scholars, some were craftsmen, some were merchants. The Torah doesn't flatten out those differences, it honors those differences. Each tribe gets their own banner. At the same time, they all camp around a single sanctuary at the center, a single God. Pull the analogy of an orchestra, violins and flutes and cellos and drums. Each instrument has its own sound, has its own voice. Each one matters. And yet, when each instrument plays alone, no single instrument can produce what they create together. The Alter Rebbe, Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad Hasidut, taught that beneath every individual soul, there is a single shared root. We're different on the surface, yet we're one beneath the surface. Ish echad b'lev ahad. One man, one heart. That's the way we camped at Sinai. And here's what's striking about this, in my opinion. We live in a time that tells us we're supposed to stand out. Everybody's out building a brand. You know, there's a profession called branding. Yeah, everybody builds a brand to be visible, to be unmistakable. The Torah is doing something more subtle. It's telling each person, you have a flag. You have a place. And you're part of something larger than yourself. Not in spite of your distinctiveness, but because of your distinctiveness. So the question I want to leave you with is, what is the place that only you can fill? And with that, I want to thank you for joining us today. I also want to invite you back next week. Starts a 3-part series by popular demand on the subject of reincarnation. It's going to be a It's going to be more cerebral. It's going to be more academic and more cerebral than what you're used to here. A lot of information. In the meantime, to keep the lights on, I'd like to encourage you to feed the pushka. Also like you to consider sponsoring your next simcha, sponsoring your next yard site, sponsoring your next facelift, whatever it may be. We love you and we're glad you're part of this group. And please bring friends with you. Rabbi Solish, would you like to say anything?
Thank you, Rabbi Yonatan. Yeah, next week, reincarnation.